And we are recording. All right, so I first and foremost wanted to say that this is a space for art of all kinds. Again, in this workshop, you may not complete your art, but I hope to inspire or influence or challenge some things that you might be dealing with and certain questions that you have, or some things that just might not have been on your mind, period. And hopefully this will be a good inspirational space. Feel free to take notes or sketch or do whatever kind of artistic expression that you feel most comfortable with as I talk. I'm not judging any of that. And also there will be designated times in which I ask you to do some more creative work, think about some things, sketch some things, write some things, and just express yourself as we go through the process. So just be prepared for that. If you don't have things ready for that, maybe snap some things now. Now's the time. And yeah, that's pretty much the only preview note I have as I go and start to share my screen. So let's share that screen. 1 second, everybody. Okay. All right. Here we go. Is everybody seeing that okay? Can I get, yes, okay, beautiful. All right, so I want everybody to take 5 minutes to artistically express what colonization and decolonization mean to you. This can either be by you writing down notes or words, thoughts. You can draw, you can sculpt, whatever it is that you want to do. Just find some way to take record of what these words mean to you. And I'm going to play some music while we do that. Okay. All right. So hopefully that was some good time to sketch out some things. And at this point, I want to ask and see. Actually, let me stop my share really quick. I want to see, is there anyone who kind of wants to share some of their thoughts or their experiences or their ideas about what colonization and or decolonization mean to them? And I'm gonna look for hand raises and we'll see how that works. Actually, okay, let's do this a little bit simpler. If anybody wants to go ahead and speak up, try just unmuting yourself and then we'll wait for people there. And if no one says anything, that's also fine. I can just keep moving.
I'll go.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. If you could just tell us your name and then go ahead, that'd be great.
So this is Alexis, and let's see if you can see my little sketch.
Nice.
So I put the sketches of a group of people funneling in ideas and thoughts into the minds of other people. And my thought was colonization is taking up residence, often by force, in the psyche, hearts, and minds of collectives of the people with the intent to control and dominate. And the message is, your narrative is primitive, not relevant, and inferior. Our narrative is superior.
Yes, wow, it's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. We're definitely going to be touching on themes of domination and erasure and things that definitely are in that realm. And thank you for sharing that with us. Anyone else want to share? We have a couple more minutes for sharing.
So I'll go. My name's Katie Orr. So this is my drawing. It's real. I don't know if you can see it or not.
Oh yeah, it's coming through.
My narrative is telling stories of the past to educate people, help through love, caring, restoring, giving, learning, and teaching in a good way, using the voice of our ancestors to help us grow and move forward.
Yes. Oh wow. Yeah. I'm not even gonna say much anymore. I'm just gonna let people share as they come, and then I'll just tell us when we have no more time, because I think everybody's probably gonna have some powerful things, and you'll see the relationships as we get through my lecture. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Okay. Anyone else?
I'll go.
Okay. Oh.
There are several of us.
Yeah, we'll take Grace and then we'll move from there.
Okay.
So this is what it means to me. It's about language. It's about structure. It's about the structure of the language that rips the tongue from its roots, that assimilates by destruction, the native sounds that echoed from human mouths until dead. A dead language cannot decry its own oppression. It's about rediscovery, about giving space that was stolen back to the syllables that first shaped the landscape. It's about the grammar of oppression. They were killed. Passive voice. The structure has no room for the truth. It changes the way thoughts form themselves in our brain, half articulated and fully felt.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Elena?
I did my little draw with some words, and it says medicina, conexión, ritual, indígena, ancestral, resistencia, huicholes.
What is huicholes? You might, I don't know that word.
Huichol is a group of indigenous that they still living in Mexico between Jalisco and Nayarit, and they still doing all the rituals and go for the peyote and all the traditions. So they are there. They are resistance, and I'm so proud to be from that place in Jalisco and support this the culture.
That was amazing. Thank you for telling me more. Whew, y'all, I'm getting the fuzzies. Okay. We have time for maybe like one or two more people to share
Well, I
their.
have one.
Yeah, go ahead.
Basically, wordsmithing, colonial, not as poetic as before. Colonial bull is part of dominance and submission, as opposed to partnership. A colony is subservient to the mother country. So like race, gender, and all the other divisive ploys, we need to say bull. I prefer dominance and submission over the general academic authoritarian because it shows the dualism better. And of course, partnership is mostly straight out of Rain Eisler.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. That's given me some thoughts and some more narrative on domination. I'm glad everybody's touching on domination because I don't touch on that as explicitly because I didn't think it was necessary, but I'm going to say a couple things now that I see the page that everyone else is on. Okay, we got time for one more. Anybody else want to share before we get back into me talking?
I could say something. Me? Who?
Okay, Nancy and then Sharab.
Okay. I did a small drawing. You can see there. I have like, it could be a system, a person, a country, etc. that feels stronger and captures the other one and control it. So the decolonization is a process where that net, is broken and by little pieces, and then at the end, the decolonization is where both entities are at the same level, and both of them have also a little part of the other because with time, they took a little bit of the other part. But yeah, that's it.
Very powerful imagery. Thank you. And Sharab?
Mine is just, I started with 2 words for colonization. It was greed and oppression. Tried to go to the roots. And then decolonization, it's the honoring of identity and equity. So my little drawings, because I don't know how to draw, but I did. This is a black circle with all the arrows going in. It just sucks everything. And then decolonization is like a bright sun that it spreads its warmth.
Wow. Okay. Oh, okay. I see one more. I'm just. We have time for that one last one, and then we have to get back into speaking piece because I have a lot to go over with you all to connect these things. But Brooklyn, I see your comment. If you want to unmute yourself, you can go ahead.
Okay. So I think for me, like one of the biggest things I see between colonization and decolonization is colonization requires a lot of people to be complacent participants in the process and to not be actively engaging or speaking out against what's going on. Whereas decolonization requires like this radical force of activism and pushing against, colonized ideas.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I just want you to remember that note about radicality because that's going to come up again. And if people have questions still by the end of what I meant by keep that in mind, definitely let me know. We'll have more time for sharing and speaking with one another because I think that's a very powerful space. Also, part of being decolonizing is like not always me dominating the space just because I have a specialization. All of us have our own positions and experiences that are just as relevant and informative as my perspective. Yes, I specialize in these certain areas. I'm studying these very intensively, but experience is key. So just remember that. And I'm gonna mute everyone again. And then I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again so we can get back into the slideshow portion. Let me do that and share. Okay, so we'll go here. So a little bit of a roadmap for where we'll be going today in terms of like what I call the lecture portion, only because that's the word I'm used to using describing myself and how I'm speaking to people. But I'm gonna try and not make it as bland as some people think of when they hear the word lecture. But this is pretty much the roadmap for some of the themes that we're going to talk about and in the order in which we'll talk about them. So first we're gonna touch on decolonization, what that is, what it means, why it's important, how it's relevant. Then we're gonna talk a little bit more about philosophy and how that connects to decolonization. And then we're gonna talk about art and how that connects to both of those things, right? And how all of these things kind of come together in the perspective of art. Two specific branches I want to talk about from philosophy in reference to art are metaphysics, epistemology, and then this topic of positionality. And yeah, I'll say more about those when we get there, but for now, I'm gonna keep pushing. So, moving towards this first theme of decolonization. Now, we already talked a lot about what some of your experiences, thoughts, perspectives were on this theme of decolonization and in reference to colonization. I want to specify how I'm thinking and using this term decolonization for the sake of this talk, so that we're all on the same page. Because as you might have noticed, there are definitely trends amongst each and every person that just spoke, but there's still different perspectives on how this thing exists, the forms it takes on, the power dynamics. And so this is where I'm coming from for the most part, but all of those things that you all said are also still relevant. So don't think that this is very restrictive. It's just a position. So yeah, I see decolonization and using it in this talk as talking about the process of deconstructing and undermining institutions of colonial legacy. So basically with that, what I'm trying to touch on is the fact that in order to decolonize, first we have to understand the structure of colonization, right? So this whole thing about deconstruction is a place of better understanding what is this colonization thing and how does it work? And in understanding how it works, a lot of people, generations of people have understood colonization as being something that's bad, it's toxic, it's harmful, and it has a lot of negative things about it. So we want to deconstruct it so that we can take apart this thing that has harmed so many. And so in that deconstruction, it's a method of understanding, and then the undermining is more of that work at taking this thing away, right? Removing it and doing some work to replace it with something hopefully that's better. And then I talk about colonial legacy here. Colonial legacy is important because a lot of people do this thing where they're like, oh, colonialism, that was a thing that happened a long time ago, right? But no, a lot of people have experiences where they're either still dealing with colonialization straight up, but more often than not, colonial mindset is built into a lot of our political and social structures, and it's still this practice of domination and power that is having a place in a lot of other people's lives, right? So that's no longer the colonization proper or formally, but there's a legacy left behind that's still impacting people and showing itself in different ways. So in that way, we want to also understand, how is this thing transformed? Okay. I also want to touch on colonialism versus imperialism. So for that, I have some imagery. I would say that imperialism is like the big base part of the umbrella, right? This is this big overarching structure. Imperialism is this project of empire expansion, of, I'm just gonna stick with empire expansion actually. But when you think of imperialism, this is the broader branch because colonialism is an extension of imperialism. Here's what I mean. So you can imagine there's a country and this country can be named, let's see, Cuckoo Cachoo. Okay, so country Cuckoo Cachoo is on a mission to expand its power. Cuckoo Cachoo can expand its power in a variety of ways, right? In the aim of empire expansion, this country can say, you know what, I'm going to go to country X, and we're going to hire people that are in country X that were born there, and they're going to run things for us, but they're going to listen to us, right? That's an example of empire expansion. But colonialism is a very specific way of doing that empire expansion, meaning that we're setting colonies. We're taking people from Cuckoo Cachoo, placing them in country X, and oftentimes the people placed there are the people that will now run things. And as we set those people from Cuckoo Cachoo in country X, those people will now hold the position of power over those people of country X, right? And this is where some of that toxicity starts to come through, because you have this empire coming and taking over not only ways of life, but taking over life itself, right? And a key part of the colonialism that I'm going to be addressing today is specifically touching on the colonialism that happens in 17th, 18th centuries, that's associated with the transatlantic slave trade. And I talk about that specific kind of colonialism because I think that that is a piece in time that has shaped the world as we know it today, right? The world would not function and look and have the relationships that it does today without that era of colonialism and transatlantic slave trade. Okay. So some of you might still be wondering though, right? We're talking about colonization. Yeah, we talk about these power dynamics and we talk about colonial legacy, but why is this important? And even more importantly, why is the colonization a bad thing, right? Just because you're expanding empire and setting people in these places, it might still not be clear to you about why this thing is bad, why colonial legacy is bad, right? What is the need for decolonization? And here's just a list of things that you often will hear from people who have social movements in relation to colonization, right? So we have racism, capitalism, erasure, and so on. But the key thing that I really want to focus on today is racism. These things are definitely still going to come up, so don't worry about that. But I'm really going to be centralizing racism because, one, I think that a lot of people forget how racism is connected to colonization and how anti-racist agendas are important for decolonization. And two, I also think that in general, people just need to take this a lot more seriously considering the times that we're in, right? We have a lot of civil unrest going on right now. We have the Black Lives Matter movement, and I think there's a place for discussion and connecting Black Lives Matter to decolonization agendas. And actually, there's already some conversations happening between groups in solidarity with one another. But yeah, I'm just here to make this connection. And I'm also centralizing this is the third point, because today I'm asking anyone who can to donate to Black Lives Matter, because I think that donating to Black Lives Matter is something that is also part of a decolonizing agenda. Again, I'll be making those connections as we go through, but here's where we're starting. Okay, so here I have some countries circled. The key ones I'm trying to outline, sorry, my circle's a little big, but are Cuba, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. These two island masses are very important to the story of colonization. They're important to the story of colonization because these are actually the islands that Christopher Columbus lands on when in 1492 he sails the ocean blue. These are the islands he lands on. And this is where a lot of the first settlements of colonization happen and take place. And I'm starting here not only so you can get a visual of like where it is that this era of colonization that I want to focus on is starting, but also I want you to take note of how small these land masses are in comparison to a lot of the land masses they're next to, because what you have is 2 years after Christopher Columbus lands in these islands, within 2 years, 100,000 natives died from starvation, mass killings, disease, suicides, etc. 100,000 people from these small land masses is very significant. And to give you some kind of comparison in numbers, for those of you who are familiar with University of Colorado Boulder, the student population at CU Boulder is 36,000, I believe, as of last year. So losing 100,000 people from 1494 to 1496 is pretty much equivalent to losing the entire student population of CU Boulder 3 times over within 2 years. That is devastation, right? And this devastation comes because Christopher Columbus did not just land there to just land and expand, but he's trying to use these people as a labor force, right? And there's a lot of tension in the force that's trying to come from trying to force the natives as being the labor force. And of course, this devastation was so significant that eventually, here what I have in bold, and I have it in bold only to draw this connection to the racialization here and the connection to racism, but you have your first African slaves arriving on the islands for labor, specifically in Española, which means like Little Spain. So this initial voyage, right, this starts off as just this guy going back and forth between Spain and these two countries, having devastating effects, but mainly here, then expands, right? It expands so that we no longer go to Europe for slaves primarily. We are coming along this coast, right, of Western Africa and taking masses of people to form colonies not only for the Spanish, but now also for the French, the Portuguese, the British, the Dutch, and we have all these different kinds of routes, right? So we start to have this takeover project expanding and other people are getting in on it. Again, I'm only going over this to show the impact that colonization has had and showing the impact that this has with reference to race. And specifically right now, we're looking at the transatlantic slave trade's connection to colonization. But just going back to overall control and that colonial legacy, this is a map of countries that have been under European control, right? So you have Europe itself, and this is someone's perspective on Europe. I know some people have like deviations that they make once you get around here, but this is what's considered Europe for this map. And as you'll see, this darker green color here is everybody that's been colonized or controlled by Europe. This lighter green is partial European control or influence. The yellow is European sphere of influence, right? And so this doesn't just stop over here and in these green spaces, but there's also influences and spheres of control based on the power gained from this project, right? And then there were countries that were never colonized by Europe, those being the orange countries here. There's 4 of them: Liberia, Japan, Korea, and Thailand. But the funny part about that is, well, not really funny, it's actually traumatic, but Liberia was not colonized under European control, but there's arguments that people make because what happens in Liberia is the United States has some sponsorship, send some people over to Liberia to take control. And Japan ends up colonizing Korea and Thailand, right? So these two still get colonized, just not by Europe, by Japan. Okay, so this colonization project is a global thing. It's not just over here. And this is why people make certain arguments as to why colonization has had an impact on global anti-Blackness, global racism, global colonization in the Western lens, right? Because this isn't just over here. This takes place on a global basis. Okay, more on this racial connection, right? There were a lot of different methods that people had for justifying mistreatment of slaves. Going back into this sphere of control, yes, there was a large influence, but not everybody was on the same page. Some people were for this project because it brought them a lot of money and wealth and happiness when they were on the benefiting side of things. And then there were a significant number of people who were also against this project because what it resulted in was a lot of slavery. Eventually, we adapt from going from slavery conditions into, yes, having these more recent colonial relationships where we stop the slavery, but let's say France still has control over a lot of different countries here. So yes, there's that transition, but before we even have that transition, there's a lot of people that are looking for justification to keep people at peace about continuing the system of control of labor force. And this is where that curse of Ham comes up. There's many different examples of racist justifications for mistreatment of slave labor, but I'm only going to give you like 2 because we are limited on time. And so this, I wonder if anybody's heard this, but I'm not going to pause because I don't want to just do too much disruption of time. But this is a story in the Bible. This is a story of Noah and his 3 sons. He was lying naked, and Noah's sons all saw him lying naked in the floor. Ham was like the bad son in the situation, and he jokes to his other 2 brothers, Japheth and Shem, and says, "Hey guys, ha ha ha, look at dad, he's drunk on the ground." And when Ham makes that joke, instead of helping his father Noah, Noah curses Canaan, which is Ham's son, and said that Canaan and all of Ham's descendants from Canaan on, a servant of servants shall he be unto his brethren. Okay, and so what some people would do with this story is then they would racialize it. There was nothing said about race in the story at all, but there were some Southern apologists for slavery that took this as biblical rationale for Black enslavement, where Africans were supposed to be the descendants of Ham, right? And so like you'll find images of this sometimes in trying to racialize, oh, which line of people are each of these sons supposed to represent, right? So in this image, Ham is, of course, what's supposed to be the Black African, and then Shem and Japheth, yes, they might be from Africa, but they're like white or brown people, right? So in this story, what some people would say is, oh, look, the Bible even says that Black people should be slaves. Those are the people that are descendants of Ham, so they deserve this. It's God-given. So we have a lot of things going on here. We have religion being used in this racist form of power. And again, this is relevant because this is connected to further justifications for keeping the slave labor force in place. This is what's helping industry grow. This is what's helping globalization. This is another schematic of racist imagery. This is supposed to show you the grades of intelligence, and basically with what's perceived to be the more Blacker features means that you have lower intelligence. So this is supposed to be the most intelligent person moving along the line to the least intelligent person. Okay, so there's a long history of this racist justification that's initially used for justification of slave labor, and this doesn't stop when slavery stops. This is the thing that a lot of people have recognized. This is something that people learn, they take as truth. There's a lot of things in philosophy as well where you have people theorizing about the hierarchy of the races. I do not have time for that, but if anybody wants materials, oh, just let me know and I will give you some. And yes, it's a long story, but I also want to address these other tools of power from colonialism because it's not just racism that's a problem here. There's other things that people take problem with in terms of legacies from colonialism. So there's narratives on capitalism. Sometimes people will combine like the racial capitalism lens, because when you think about the labor force that was used to produce capital, or bodies that were being used as capital to better stabilize and enrich European countries, that's early forms of what a lot of people would note as capitalism. And this just changes into everything. Some people make connections into prison labor as being continuations of slave labor and forms of keeping capitalism in its sense of keeping the worker oppressed and under the thumb of the property owners. Erasure is a huge trend in talking about colonization and some of the bad things to happen, right? So we not only have erasure of literal populations of people where genocide is relevant, right? So we not only have things like mass numbers of people being wiped away on their islands, massive numbers of people being murdered for not complying, But you also have erasure of cultures and languages via assimilation tactics, via laws that are very harsh upon people who are not assimilating. And this all then comes down to a narrative of violence. There's this narrative of toxic extraction. Again, reminding ourselves that a lot of what was being done in those early voyages of Christopher Columbus in working for Spain was a project of getting crops from the land. And so this is why land was so important, because you can get all these different access to crops and then sell those things and keep building your industry that way. There's also toxic extraction of physical things from people's bodies and their own labor. And then there's environmental terror, because again, in using the land as just this source of income, a lot of people fail to recognize what they're doing to the land or give less care. And so some of these pieces of art are things to kind of represent more of these criticisms that people have about colonialism. Okay, so that's a lot. So I have key points here. Key points I want you to take away, if that was just way too overwhelming, is just understand that colonialism had and has a huge impact. And there's a lot of connections that people still make about what's happened before to how things are still relevant now, right? Countries, Western powers get used to extracting and gaining power and money and income off of the land and off of bodies in these certain ways. And then it's institutionalized as something that just needs to continue, right? And then racist justification was used, is used to keep slavery and continue expansion in a colonial mindset. Okay, and then here I have some questions for reflection. And I want everybody to take, let me see where we at. Oh, we're doing good. Okay, just take like 3 to 4 minutes to kind of reflect on these questions. How might understanding colonialism from a racial lens impact your art? When do we address race in conversations of colonialism? Is there significance to addressing race in conversations of on decolonization? If so, what? And I'm gonna leave these questions up and just count down some more time with some more mood music. And yeah, after that, I'll take a couple of comments from people who might want to share, and we'll keep moving. So let's do that. Hold on, we're gonna play something different. Okay. Also, I just want to make a brief note. If there are other questions or reflections that you have that are not these questions up here, feel free to reflect on other things too that might have come up for you. These are not restrictive. Nothing is restrictive here. Okay. right, so I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to come back to you all and ask or see if there's anyone that wants to share. Also, I see the comments in the chat. Thank you. This is great. I love seeing people share their experiences and more with these topics as I go through. So feel free to keep collaborating with one another and telling us more what you know. I saw some things about Quijano. Definitely familiar, just about time. But yes, keep sharing. And yeah, I'm going to take a couple of things from a couple of different people. I'll say we'll get back into the lecture portion at about 22, or let's say 24. So anybody want to share their reflections so far? And wait, let me make sure people can unmute themselves. Okay. So you can now unmute yourselves if you have things to say.
So I actually kind of have a comment, like, and a reflection on what has already been said. Because someone typed in the chat too that colonization is only with colonizing nations, even though when we think about how, like, we have these hierarchies of race and class and all these things, there's very clearly buy-in at most levels. And so to try to exempt people from that becomes really tricky, because then even if you think about like how colonization has influenced things like misogynoir and what Black womanhood looks like and all of these different things, there's still this buy-in from women like Beyonce, who then go to other places. And because of how colonization has made this global move to create class system and subjugation, systems of subjugation, like she feels very comfortable going to places like India and exploiting labor of other dark-skinned women. And so I think when people think of art and try to divide it from colonization, like even from that of Black and brown people, there are plenty of times when Black and brown people in positions of power who are also of colonial nations, even though they might be in a underrepresented group, are still like signed off and allowed to kind of hurt their own group or hurt other groups of color.
That's a really powerful point. Thank you. Yeah, it's really important to further analyze roles, right? Roles and placement and influences that come from not only being a colonial power formally or having that heritage, but also what does it mean to be existent within a culture of colonialism or the cultures of colonialism. And yeah, I'm gonna shut up. I'm gonna stop commenting on people's stuff too and just let you all take this space because I don't want to keep talking. So did you want to say anything else, Gwendolyn? I saw the mouth like go if there's anything.
That's just my thinking, Fate. No, I mean,
oh, okay.
Well, because it's also, so I actually got in a debate with a teacher when we went and we looked at Persian artwork, just because what happened was that there was a Persian, I want to say Persian photographer who would go to Egypt, and this was during the revolution, and she would take pictures of people's faces, mostly like peasant class people in her own description. And so what does that say? Even though you are from a place that is actively being accosted by the West, and there's like multiple layers with what's going on in the Middle East, but you're going to Egypt, you're looking for people in Egyptian society who tend to be in the lower reigns of power. And not only are you as like a marginalized person like making money off of them and telling their story for them, but in a space where you could have opened it up for an artist who's of that identity, you've chosen instead to like take pictures of these people who are not in the same boat as you, and then also put, I want to say, like Farsi poems on their faces. And I'm like, that's not even the language they speak.
All right, thank you. I see a hand thing with Sharab. Is that still relevant?
I just want to talk about Toussaint Louverture, who was a slave and Haitian. And I don't know that many people know, he led the Haitian Revolution, which was the first instance of independence from a colonial power in this hemisphere. The American Revolution is considered by most the first, but it is not. It was in Haiti, and it was Toussaint Louverture who did it. Now, I worked in Haiti in this century, and I was appalled to see that Haiti, in essence, has 10 to 12 Black families who have been in power since the revolution. Now, I was born in Argentina, and I was trained by Paulo Freire, who wrote The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, in which he says that the oppressed, if by revolution they come to power,
I can't.
they oppress others like they were oppressed. So this is a vivid example to me. And what I am trying to say, are you there?
Yes.
Yes, we hear you.
Yeah,
okay,
we can hear you.
I thought maybe I was talking to myself. What I am trying to say is that because people have been born and lived under oppression, they internalize that paradigm. So it has to be an inner paradigm shift. The paradigm of colonialism is an inner paradigm as well. So until that happens, what's the sense? You see what I'm trying to say?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm. That's
Wow.
okay. I'm gonna just like keep people keep sharing because I don't want to dominate the space. And I see that it's already 25. I'm gonna let this go to 30 because I think this is a good sharing time. And yeah, I saw that Kathleen wanted to speak too. So go ahead, Kathleen, unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
So somebody had put in the chat about, Native Americans and the romanticized imagery that we have, and that there doesn't seem to be contemporary images that are accessible to the masses of Native Americans today. So I started a project many years ago, and I went to the Hopi Reservation, and I've been painting the elders from one of the villages, and only as they really are, not as a romanticized version, or not as a concept that I think Natives should be, just looking at them and painting them and showing them in order to give an opportunity for people to look into the eyes of these beautiful people and see them as human beings, not a story from the past, not a romanticized version, not a savage, but just a human being. And I felt like if people had an opportunity to look in their eyes, it would change the dynamic as to take that that history that we've erased and start bringing it back into a present day as these are people. And then on the give back, if I do sell any images, I give back in different things that they've asked for.
Thank you. I got another reach out from someone. Alan?
Yeah. So I just wanted to go back to the original questions that you had on, as far as when is race relevant to art and how it might affect it, when should we talk about race in reference to colonization. And just going back to Sharab's point, I think it's important to talk about race within decolonization because it's extremely difficult to talk about decolonization without talking about one of the specifics frameworks, which is race. If you don't talk about it, if it's not reflected in your art, you're missing a big portion of it. And it may lead you to ignore big issues within imperialism. So the big issue that I have, I'm from Dominican Republic, that's a Dominican myself. Even after the imperial powers left the country in the Dominican Republic, and even after Louis Vuitton, after the Haitian Revolution won in Haiti, there were still many problems within colonization. There were still racism throughout Haiti and the Dominican Republic that divided us. And even the example of going back to Liberia, Liberia was an experiment from the US Congress after the Civil War here in the US. Many Blacks were freed, sent to Liberia, But what happened? Colonialism, even though there were free blacks, they became the imperial power in Liberia. And there was a distinction, a caste system of American Liberians versus Native Liberians. So I think it's definitely important to address race within colonization.
Thank you. So I saw that there was a question for Gwendolyn. So I just want to kind of close out this section with that question to Gwendolyn, since they're open to answering that question. And then we'll see the answer, and then I'll get back to my portion, but there'll be more time to speak. So if you didn't get to speak now, there'll be more time built in. So who was it with the question for Gwendolyn again?
That was me.
Okay, go ahead.
Having a rough time figuring out how to phrase this. So the field I'm in, what I'm studying, cultural anthropology, I think, you know, we all know cultural anthropologists and anthropologists in general play a huge role in, you know, the power of racism and stuff like that, as far as the colonial period. And so for me, like, you know, she was talking of, sorry, they were talking about exploitation of, you know, indigenous populations and even of people that, you know, are similar to them or from their home countries. And I was just curious how they would recommend kind of like overcoming those. Like, how do we overcome that? You know, how do we address that as a group? Does that make sense at all?
Of course that makes, I think that's, so I've met quite a few anthropologists. And so actually, I know Ájené because we're in the same field, kind of. So we both study, so Ájené is like an adult and studies philosophy, and I'm still like a child. But I mean, it's in all fields. It's not just cultural anthropology. It's in sociology. It's in political science. It's this idea that even as brown people, we can other ourselves. And there is a point, because of education and because of access to wealth and all sorts of things, we do tend to be out of communities that we want to help, which is fine. And so my suggestion is always that you identify people within the community and you ask them what they want. I know right now a lot of people have become hot and bothered all of a sudden about prisoners' rights, and that's also a discussion about colonialism and color and race. But there are people who think they know what's best for prisoners because of whatever reason. And what Angela Davis herself said is that you should ask them what they want and what they need, because like facts are facts. It doesn't matter, as I think we've already kind of addressed in this chat, what your education is, because to be honest, these are lived experiences. To some extent, you can get educated, and that gives you a leg up in understanding some of the more insidious systematic aspects. But if you go and ask like my old ass Black grandpa, who's like 97 years old and lives in Oklahoma, like his opinions on what has happened to him for the past, 97 years of life, he might not frame it the way an academic does, but he will tell you what's happening. And he'll tell you what's happening in a way that's relevant because it's what's happening and what can be addressed for him. So I think it's always, as academics and as people with an education and access to wealth, is kind of like stepping down and making room and space.
Yes, well, thank you for that answer. Thank you for the question. Thank you everyone for sharing in the space. I really do, I'm muting everyone again. I hate this, but I have to. I think that this sharing is incremental to making this talk in and of itself somewhat less colonial, because again, we're focusing on recognizing power and power dynamics and relationships, and that's my piece. And letting people talk for themselves, represent themselves, give their own experiences is in recognizing the power and the position I have and taking the forefront in this discussion, but also shifting that power back into the hands of you all who have your own experiences and recognitions with colonialism. And again, all of us, whether we recognize it or not, have been impacted by colonialism or colonial legacy. And that's very important to reflect on. And we're gonna go back to the lecture portion so that we don't run out of time. But thank you again. And I'm just gonna keep saying thank you as we go through, because I really do appreciate when people are sharing. Okay, so we're going back to the share. All right, so let's talk about philosophy. And I'm not gonna spend too much time here, but I am gonna make some points because this is my field, this is what I do. And a key part of why probably a good portion of you here is to learn more about this field and how you can use it or what does it mean in relation to these topics. So yeah, we're going to touch on it. So philosophy, there's a Greek word, philosophia, that this word is influenced from, called the love of wisdom. And the traditional, and I wish you could see me right now, but air quotes, traditional philosophy, the philosophy that's recognized as a profession and that's in the canon of academia, that usually goes back to like ancient Greece and that kind of tradition of philosophizing. But that's not the only way of philosophizing. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. But before I do, going into like this traditional sense, there's these key academic branches that are usually acknowledged: metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and logic. But a personal note that I have about what philosophy is, what's happening, when do you know that you're doing philosophy? I personally think that if you're doing anything in the realm of questioning the world around you, questioning how things work, questioning just general questioning. I'm not going to keep giving examples. If you're doing questioning, you're likely doing some form of philosophizing. But again, you know, what you have in like what's called the traditional context of philosophy in these branches, there's metaphysics, which will be questions about reality, sometimes causation. This thing gets really big and really messy really quickly. But for the sake of simplicity, we're going to focus on questions about reality and causation. Epistemology is an academic branch of questioning about knowledge and belief, actually. Ethics is a field that mainly questions things about values, morals, things of that nature. And then logic is questions about questions. That was my joke. But this is a field that mostly deals with like truth and validity of statements or things or ideas. And this is a very deduction, math-based kind of field, but it still has to deal with this method of questioning, okay? So for those of you who didn't have this context, if you take nothing else from this in terms of what philosophy is, if you ask me, I would say it's the field of questioning. And these aforementioned branches, so metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and logic, they can definitely be used for decolonizing work, but not necessarily. And actually, in a lot of different instances, historically and presently, these are used for work that does further colonizing and can be very negative. And that's a big critique that people have about philosophy. If any of you know anything about the diversity in philosophy, or if you don't, I'm here to tell you, the diversity is terrible. It's one of the most white, most male-dominated, most straight Christian, or I wouldn't say Christian, most white male-dominated fields in all of academia. And I read something not too long ago that said it's worse than STEM. So yeah, there's a lot of work that could be doing that work, could be doing this decolonization things, could be anti-racist, but it's not. And either those things that are not go just way too abstract to the point where they just don't want to address that kind of stuff, or there's some things that are just blatantly racist and blatantly further promoting imperialism and colonization, domination, erasure. But that's for you all to explore if you want to. And again, if you have questions for me about where do I see those things, we can have another conversation. But I'm here to just show that there's hope, because if you take these things for what they are and not necessarily what you've been shown from them, these all can connect back to how do we decolonize? What does that look like? What does anti-racism look like? How can we overcome? How can we be radically awake to problems that are happening around us? And also, these branches are not all encompassing, at least if you ask me. Now, this is something that's also debatable amongst philosophers. Some philosophers would say that this is philosophy, this is it. There's nothing beyond that. And then if there's anything else like political philosophy, it's just falling within these four main branches. But I would say that this is still not all encompassing. Yeah, if you're going along that Greek tradition, maybe, but there's a lot of people who did this Love of Wisdom project and who have done this method of questioning first and foremost way beyond before the time of like ancient Greek imperialism, and after, like outside of that context, there's a lot of work that has been done. And I think that you can use other styles and areas of questioning and still be doing philosophy. Again, with the key point in that being questioning things around you. And I would say also, again, this is from me, that typically theorizing, if you're doing theoretical work, that means you're doing some philosophy. But the cool thing about that is, if you focus on how can your theorizing be more philosophical, I find that you get a lot more in-depth and cool thought patterns and critiques and deep questions than if you take it from some other spheres. I'm going to leave that there for now. Okay, so art. Okay, actually, before I move on, so this slide is to connect philosophy back to where we just came from, right? So if the aim is to decolonize, where does philosophy come into play? Well, first of all, a lot of people are usually going to come from these 4 areas and how they address decolonization. But also, when you start to question and theorize about colonization or decolonization, then you could be doing philosophical work, right? And you can expand on the philosophical themes in that work with a little bit of focus. Okay, and then art, right? Art, I see art as the place in which all of this can come together, in which all of this can be pieced together. Art is a space of reflection, I would say history preservation, and actually it can be radical in history preservation, because whereas you have a lot of colonial narratives about how stupid or savage or violent that these non-white folks are, these people that are under control are, these enemies, these others, people can speak for themselves through their art, right? And they can either be explicit or implicit with those methods to tell truth in a world of myth. And yes, it's just a really cool space of power. And again, you can still have questioning and challenging in your art, whether that be direct or indirect. Art can be a great power of influence. It's used in and for social movements and beyond. And it's also a space of culture shaping. And of course, there's a lot more potential that's not even laid out here. But I think for the sake of what we're talking about today and where I'm going to go next, I think it's important to recognize like these potentialities in art and how they can help to decolonize spaces. Okay, so I have an example of someone who is a Chicana poet, writer, feminist, and theorist. And not everyone recognizes her as a philosopher, but I definitely do. She's definitely touched on some deep metaphysical concepts in her work, and I'm gonna show you those through these 2 articles. Okay. So these are 3 different metaphysical points of view about reality. The first point of view is idealism, where people would say that the only reality, right? So when you question what reality is, because that's a key point of metaphysics, a lot of people say that the only reality is the ideal world, right? The place where things are in their most perfect form. There's this guy named Plato, and he believed that the physical world around us is not real. So what you see in front of you, in front of your computer, it's not real. And it's not real because it's constantly changing. But the only real things would be things that are unchanging, things that have perfect forms, okay? And so for Plato, he would say you can never say what the world around us really is, therefore it's not real. And the world of ideas beyond this, which we cannot really see, is a world of unchanging and absolute truth. Dualism is a viewpoint that says there are 2 kinds of reality. Also, I saw the hand raised, but I'm going to get you after this part's done. So just keep that together. Dualism is a view that says there are 2 kinds of reality. There's the material physical world around us that is real, right? So idealism denied that, but this is taking that into perspective and saying, no, it's real. And then there's the immaterial world, this non-physical spiritual world. And both of those are real and have some kind of relationship to one another. And a key question from that perspective is, how do they relate to or interact with one another? And then you have materialism, which would say, on the opposite end of idealism, only the world of matter is real, right? So there is no mythical spiritual world. There's no non-physical world. The only thing that's real is what you see in front of you. Materiality, something that you can sense around you. Okay, so thoughts, ideas, and other non-physical things are merely movements of physical matter or chemical reactions. So in any sense that a thought is real or an idea is real, if it's real at all, you have to bring it back down to something that's material. okay? There's no reality beyond the physical. So if there's anything that you're gonna call real, it better have some kind of material connection, okay? So Antaldua, she takes more of this dualistic view of reality. She thinks that there's two modes of consciousness, and this is in this paper, this first paper, Creativity and Switching Modes of Consciousness, 1986. If you want any of the papers or resources that I've talked about in this talk, feel free to email me. I will show my email somewhere at the end of this presentation, or ask that it be sent out to people who would like to have my information, and I can send you some of these papers. But back to this, so she thinks that there's two modes of consciousness. There's a rational reasoning mode connected to external reality, which she refers to as an upper world, and an imaginative world of fantasy. Can be of one world or several. And we're constantly shifting back and forth between a rational reasoning mode, which would be more in that sense of that material sense, just not quite. And then we have this imaginative state, which is more in line with that immaterial kind of sense of reality. And so she claims that both of these worlds that she talks about are real, right? So this is a quote from Antaldua. She says, "To me, everything is real. Fiction is as true as whatever happened literally to people. The body does not discern between different kinds of stimuli. The body doesn't distinguish between what happens in the imagination and what happens in the material world." Okay? And at this point, you might be like, okay, so we get the metaphysics and this whole thing about realities, but what is this gonna have to do with art? Trust me, we're getting there. So if I'm losing you, just stick with me. This gets really cool. In this paper, she also talks about race and consciousness, right? So she's going from this talk about reality shifting and also to talking about themes of race and consciousness in relation to these realities. So Antaldua talks about how anthropologists label mind related to worlds of imagination, soul, and spirit as primitive and taken to be savage. So this is not currently, right? This is a note that she's making about historically. This is something that has happened where you have anything that's not material, anything that's too imaginary, it's associated with those savage folk. It's labeled as other, it's labeled as primitive and not as valid. I think this also has a high influence from the Enlightenment era, because the Enlightenment era has a lot of those kinds of influences of focusing on materiality and away from imagination. But yeah, no time for that, so we're gonna keep moving. And then she also makes a note how Indians and indigenous folk were deemed to be unsophisticated and their minds were said to be primitive. And this was another place in how external reality was privileged. This then made thinking become a hierarchized thing, right? So the best kind of thinking is going to be the thinking that's related to the material world. And those lower forms of thinking, those racialized forms of thinking that are immaterial are going to be lower forms of rationality, lower forms of thinking and consciousness, right? But Antaldua, she's like, this shouldn't even be a thing. Really, these worlds are both important and we constantly shift back and forth between the two worlds. There should not be one prioritized way of thinking over another. She says nothing is separate. It all filters through from one world to another, from one mode of consciousness to another. And then Antaldua relates the material and the immaterial worlds, right? So Antaldua says that whatever occurs in the external world occurs first in the imagination. And this right here is what I think is super cool and important for artwork. If you start to think about everything in the external world as something that first occurs in your imagination, right? Especially in relation to social structures or institutions around you, that's some really powerful work, because then also when you think about the impact that art has on the imaginative state, that means that your artwork can influence more of what is produced in the external world, right? So if you buy what Antaldua is saying about reality here in a metaphysical position, you can start to see this space of where your art has power to shape reality, right? And some of you might have not needed Antaldua to say that in those terms to understand that, because you might have already seen that experience and how art is purposeful and powerful. There were some artistic pieces I had before on the slideshow. One was a Black Lives Matter painting on a street. Like, these are things that help bolster social movements as well. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So Anzaldúa also says the material world coexists with the immaterial body, or the immaterial world in the body. So basically what she's trying to touch on here in this paper is the fact that there's both like our spirit, mind, and self working with our material mind and self together all times. And our body is this place where there's constant shifting and back and forth motions, right? So you can imagine like this happening in the same body, and like you're constantly giving messages between these two states. And then this is more on like a soul body relationship, but it's not so important for this, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to keep moving. Key point that I want you to take from this first part in which I'm talking about Anzaldúa's work is that you can do really cool things with or concerning reality using your art, right? You can either take what Anzaldúa says is true about reality and these states of mind and how they interact with one another and use that to influence how you choose to present messages in your work, or you can even be attention with that claim and then kind of represent that in your work. You can start questioning reality around you, undermining reality in your work as well. But like this metaphysics, this questioning about what's real, what's not, that's a really cool space to do some artwork. And it's a really cool space to challenge the reality that's been posed upon us from a colonial lens, right? So like the current reality that we live in does not have to be your ultimate reality, right? So you can come to a place of, where does my work have a place in shaping reality and in decolonizing these colonial structures around me? Okay, second paper from Anzaldúa is going to be Bearing Witness, Their Eyes Anticipate the Healing. Again, we're exploring metaphysical duality. So she continues on with this theme, but this time Anzaldúa is looking at Liliana Wilson's art, and Liliana Wilson's amazing artist. I have some images coming up soon. And she describes Liliana's paintings as dreams that want to become reality. Es sueños que se quieren hacer realidad. And this is again in that space of like the dream space, the imaginative space in relation to the material world, right? In describing Liliana Wilson's art, Anzaldúa says, los sueños, the dreams. She depicts attempt to bridge the reality of the dream with physical reality. In her work, el sueño, the dream, de la pintura, of the painting, becomes embodied, physically real. But upon looking away from it, the viewer realizes que la artista, that the artist, has successfully captured us in a lucid waking dream, merely through the medium of painted images on a flat surface, blurring the boundaries between the reality of the picture and that of our lives, right? And I'm just gonna keep going and talking about themes that Anzaldúa draws out of Wilson's work to show you more of artistic analysis and pieces of like Anzaldúa's lens on Wilson's work, and showing how this is a space of transformation, this is a space of activism, and this is a space of healing, right? So Nepantla is a Nahuatl word that means in the middle of it, or middle. And this is a word that Anzaldúa uses to describe Wilson's work further. Anzaldúa says that Wilson's most successful paintings are the ones that are in Nepantla, right? So the most successful works are going to be those that are in between the space of reality and the imagination. And Anzaldúa says that this work is something that transports the viewer into space between the conscious and the unconscious imaginative space. So that medium space between the conscious world, the material world, and the imaginative world, the immaterial world, that space in between those two is a space of imagination and transformation, right? Anzaldúa basically is calling this imaginative space as an important space for decolonial, anti-racist work. And then there's another theme of dismemberment, where dismemberment is a place of healing and potential in between the imaginative world, dream space, and the material world. Anzaldúa describes Wilson's work as Koyoshalki-like images, which lead the viewer to imagine and reenact the trauma that initiated the fall. So for those of you that don't know, Koyoshalki is this thing right here. And this is imagery from an ancient civilization. And if you notice here, this is a dismembered body. If you want more on this image and civilization it comes from, just hit me up and I can actually post a link before we even leave today. But the head is dismembered from the body, the arms are dismembered, legs, right? And so this is what Anzaldúa connects back to Wilson's work. And also, if you note, this is Anzaldúa, another effort of Anzaldúa to do more decolonizing work is by working against the erasure of the Coyolxauhqui people in her acknowledgement and interpretation and analysis of Wilson's work, right? So even in your analyses of art, you can work at moving against the erasure that comes from colonization by going back to certain histories that have been attacked and bringing those back up and awakening the value in those things. So she said that these Coyolxauhqui-like images lead the viewer to imagine and reenact the trauma that initiated the fall, the falling apart, the splintering. So we're revisiting the problem. And as the viewer continues to look at these paintings, they imagine, as do the subjects of the painting, how such a healing process could be enacted, right? So in this dismemberment that we see in Wilson's work, so all these are Wilson's work, when we see dismemberment, that also is a place of potentiality. It's also a place of reflecting on how can we heal from this broken space, right? And so that's the hidden optimism in the splintering. So the key points of this is that art can serve as a radical space of imagination, and to remember the themes of Nepantla, in between space, and dismemberment, right? Because those can deal with and be used for healing in a space of trauma placed on us from colonization and colonial legacy. Okay, and then here's some more questions for reflection, and then I'm going to close here. I also have some comments on positionality, but we're out of time for me to do that. I want to allow for people to still share and speak. So questions for reflection that I have, and then I'm going to come off and let people speak as we close. What aspects of reality would you like to touch on with your work? Does a dualistic view of reality serve you for your art? Or do idealism or materialism mean something more, right? So do you buy into the dualistic lens of reality? Or do you think that we should be focusing more on materialism or idealism as what's real? And how can you utilize Nepantla and dismemberment in your work? Okay, actually I'm gonna touch on this because I don't want to cheat anybody out of the information. Positionality, this is the last slide too. I just want people to recognize positionality as they talk about their work. Positionality is the thing that's connected to epistemology very strongly. It's an idea that your social position and experience can shape how and what you know and or what you believe, right? So these images are representative of how positionality can impact people's relationship to issues, right? And so this one directly relates to Black Lives Matter, right? So you have Black America in representation of this person holding up a sign that says, "I can't breathe," right? And this is a statement that's really powerful for the Black Lives Matter movement. And then you have someone from White America saying, "I can't see." And this is supposed to be representative of the fact that a lot of the times White America has said, like, this isn't an issue, right? I don't see the issue. That person was a criminal, right? And the critique here is that this person's position, their privileges, are blinding them to what's wrong over here. Same thing happening here. This guy is dressed in what's supposed to be quote unquote Indian garb. And on his stomach it says, "Go savages, kill them, go warrior savages." And he's saying that, "Oh, but I'm honoring you, dude," to an indigenous person. Yeah, again, his positionality is making him understand this in a very different way from the person who is being represented from this imagery, right? So the last thing I just wanted to say is that certain privileges we have often serve as blinders to realities and experiences. It's important to remember that as you make truth claims expressed in your art, but also questioning what might be missing from your representations in your art, right? So like your perspective might be missing a lot of what's really going on, someone else's reality. And some of you touched on that actually in your comments earlier, so that's interesting. And then some of us might have more personal, direct relationship with colonial legacy and oppression. If you go back to looking, or if you watch this again and go back to the beginning, look at how different people talk about colonization. And think about yourselves, for the people who shared, about your relationship to colonization and how direct or indirect what you described colonization or decolonization was. Because that's probably impacted a little bit by your positionality. Okay, and I'm gonna close there. Woo! And I wish I had more time, but if anybody wants to say anything with these last 2 minutes, I'm definitely open to hearing more from you all. And yeah, I'm gonna make it so that people can unmute themselves again. And yeah, let's see what shares.
Hi, hello?
Yeah.
Okay, hi, I'm Layla, and I wanted to talk about the second question. Does a dualistic view of reality serve you for your art, or do idealism or materialism mean something more? And for me, I have adopted kind of it's simultaneously monist and kind of dualistic, where I think of like a phenomenal world and a noumenal world of like, there is some underlying reality, how there's a phenomenal reality of separation. Like my hand is not exactly a part of this phone, and the phonemes that I'm saying are not, like there is separation between them so that they're distinguishable, but at the same time, like collectivism and community are like the ultimate reality. And so for my art, it's really important to me to hold the simultaneity of how the phenomenal world is real, but also the noumenal world maybe exists. But more important than all of that is emotional justice, I think. Social justice and material justice, but also emotional justice. And whether the phenomenal or noumenal aspects of something are more conducive to getting people's needs met, getting equity to happen, getting reparations to happen, I think we can highlight different aspects of reality. So,
wow. Well, that was some thinking right there. I think you left us with some really cool things to think about. Oh, before we go, this piece here. Oh no, actually, let me just pull it off my wall before we go. This piece here is a representation of my own artwork that I think does a little bit of decolonizing. I call it Black Woman in White Space. There's a lot going on here, and I'm not going to do the interpretation here. I'm going to just let this sit for people and give you the name. But I also practice what I preach. That was pretty much what I'm trying to show. And if we do have a part 2, I would love to go over this if people have questions about it. I would love to see things that maybe some of you come up with as a result of this. Yeah, I'm open to hearing more, but I thank you all for coming and listening to me and sharing with our sharing space. And yeah, I'm gonna close so we're respectful of people's evenings. But don't forget, if you are able, please donate to this event, because we're trying to get up to $1,000 for Black Lives Matter 5280. You have friends you think will be interested, this will be recorded, and we will have a donation space for that as well. And I think Cal is going to give us some information on how to do that donation moving forward from the recorded session. So Cal, you wanna go ahead and...
Yeah, hey, so yeah, thank you all so much. And Ájené, I also wanted to ask, there was a question on whether or not these slides would be shared.
Yeah, I can share them, most definitely. I can get those to you, and then we'll see what goes from there. And Walt, you're sharing your screen. If you could cut off your screen sharing, that would be great.
Good to see you.
Well,
I'm glad we finally got to see you, though.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't see me at this moment, but oh, that must be this one.
Oh, I got you. I'll stop it.
Go
I can stop it for you. Perfect. Okay. So, Cal, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
and
okay.
I'll make sure those slides are getting to everybody.
Okay, slides are shared, and then you are still recording the video, and we'll be able to share that out as well.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll do that, and then as far as the part 2, yeah, Boulder County Arts Alliance would definitely be open for that. I think this conversation was too short, and there was just amazing amount of things that you brought up that I think people would have more interest on that part 2. So yeah, we will talk about that, and then the last bit, was there a final question or?
Oh, how do they share moving forward from the recorded session?
How do they?
I mean, not share, donate. I'm sorry.
Oh, donate. Yeah, let's go back to that. Okay, so yeah, if you would go to bouldercountyarts.org, and then there is okay, I'm on the right spot. If you go to where on the far left tab, there is, what is that?
I'm gonna mute some people just so that we have just Cal, Cal. Cal, can you unmute yourself really quick? Sorry, I muted everyone so it'd be even. There you go. You're good.
So yeah, if you hover over the Join BCAA and then go down to the last item in the drop-down menu, which is Make a Donation, you'll be linked to Colorado Gives, and you just need to specify that the donation is for BLM 5280. And again, we're trying to raise $1,000 to donate, so any support helps. So thank you so much.
Yeah, and thank you everyone. I hope to see you again. Looks like we're working on part 2. So I'll see y'all later. Bye, have a good evening.